anywhere, only go with me. Lay any burden on me, only sustain me. And sever any tie in my heart except the tie that binds my heart to yours. If you have men who will only come if they know there is a good road, I don't want them. I want men who will come if there is no road at all. I will go anywhere, provided it is forward. David Livingston.
Thank you so much. And that is for the theme of this year at Stella Moving Center, which is irreversibility, eyes to the stars. Welcome everyone to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle sponsored every Saturday at Stella Moving Center in Honolulu, Hawaii. We take up a different topic from our almanac, where there's a change in topics every week. This is the Stella Moving Center Almanac. And our topic this week is actually based on a Hindu holiday called Janmashtami, which will take place in 2 days our time, which is the birthday of Krishna avatar. And the topic is Galaxies of Enlightened Beings. And there's a quote that says, within the invisible form of the Purna avatar, and Krishna is considered one of the avatars, there resides a galaxy of Mahatmas. So we have galaxies of enlightened beings, which doesn't necessarily tie us to any one of the different wonderful world traditions. And so I'm very delighted that Cliff Tillotson, my husband, is going to give us a presentation, and he's going to do it from the Taoist perspective. He is somebody who has studied the world's religions and philosophies ever since he was a very young man, most of which has been within the framework of the study of theosophy, and yet it's so multifaceted in its considerations of these different philosophies and religions. It's possible to really approach something from any of those perspectives and get a very full and rounded vision of the topic. So I'm very curious, because I've never heard him speak from the Taoist tradition, to hear what he has to say. And he's going to be helped by Sarah Hodges, who's, I think, going to help him with a slide presentation along the way. So Cliff, please take it away. Start our conversation.
Well, I guess the reason I thought of the Taoist tradition is because the topic itself is so enigmatic and mysterious. And when everyone reads the Tao, as I think Bob is probably the most knowledgeable of the Tao of us, maybe, it leaves one in a state of kind of befuddled mystery. But the whole topic of Galaxies of Enlightened Beings just makes you kind of think about the mysterious world we live in, if that's indeed the case. You know, I think if we're honest with ourselves, we have to pretty much admit that this whole world and universe that we live in is mysterious, and we too are completely ultimately a mystery unto ourselves, even though we have to pretend in daily life that we kind of got it together, we know what's going on. But when you look out into the night sky, what you mainly see out there is dark space. But along with that dark space, you see all these sparks of light, you know, stars and galaxies and suns. And it makes you wonder what, at least me, what are those sources of light? I mean, my whole adult life, I've always woke up every morning and said to myself the Gayatri. And so I would start my day thinking a little bit about the nature of the sun. And the Gayatri is, in all three worlds, terrestrial, astral, and celestial, may we meditate upon the splendor of that divine sun, which illuminates all. May its golden light nurture our understanding and guide us on our journey to its sacred seat. So I've always just kind of wondered if, besides the sun being a source of light, maybe it's also a source of our consciousness. Because I was at a lecture with Renée a long time ago by the Dalai Lama, and he made this statement that it's always stuck with me, that if you clear the mind of all its thoughts and emotions, its essential nature is pure light. And so that's always intrigued me, that is there a connection between consciousness and light? And when you think about it, in the ancient traditions, all the stories and mythologies, they've often connected forces in nature with the idea of a being, like Neptune in the sea or Vayu in the wind, but also especially the sun being like Surya, the god of the sun. So in a sense, is there a way of thinking of aspects of nature as beings? We don't really think that way. We normally think of ourselves as beings and other creatures on the earth as beings. But when you start to think about a galaxy of enlightened beings, it's like, where are they? But we might ask ourselves, what does it mean to be enlightened? And we might be considered ourselves enlightened if we compare ourselves to the gecko on the wall or a black beetle. They're operating with a kind of consciousness that's like instinctual, but we're operating with self-consciousness. They might look up to us and go, those are enlightened beings. But relatively speaking, it is said in ancient texts that there are beings that are to us as we are to the black beetle and the gecko. So those are the beings that we're trying to think about. I guess here are those kinds of beings that have gone beyond the notion of self-consciousness as we have it as an individual identity, and has somehow blown the walls off of that and have a sense of or reside in a state of universal or cosmic self-consciousness. And it is said in the ancient texts that there are these beings, and they make up what is called a guru parampara chain, a whole line of gurus that are enlightened, also referred to as a guardian wall, beings that actually protect humanity to keep us out of more trouble than we already get ourselves into. And there's all these names that we have through history of these kinds of beings as gurus, initiates, bodhisattvas, Mahatmas, sages, and so forth. And apparently in past ages, they freely walked amongst human beings as human beings, and were known as enlightened beings. But as now we're living in more of a dark age, Kali Yuga or Iron Age, they tend to operate more behind the scenes and help humanity. Because often if they operate out in the open, they get persecuted by the rulers of the earth who don't like their power being questioned. In the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asks Krishna, what are the marks of an enlightened being? He says, what, O Keshava, is a description of that wise and devoted man who is fixed in contemplation and confirmed in spiritual knowledge? What may such a sage declare? Where may he dwell? Does he move and act like other men? And Krishna does not really answer his question directly. He says, a man is said to be confirmed in spiritual knowledge when he forsaketh every desire which enters his heart, and of himself is happy and content in the self. So the way Krishna is seeing is a sage or enlightened being has no necessary external marks. All of his nature as being enlightened has to do with an internal nature, not an external nature. So when we might ask ourselves, what does it mean for a being to have cosmic or universal or enlightened consciousness? And I used to think of it as someone that's all-knowing. But maybe another way of thinking about an enlightened being is someone who, or some being who allows the light from the light from the source of the universe come through them. In other words, they have no blockages. And so they, in any particular context, are able to be uplifting, to shed light in that context, and in a simple sense, to be incredibly appropriate. And one quote from Theosophist Robert Crosby says that one of the results of wisdom is the ability, in degree at least, to do the right thing at the right time and in the right place. And I think we've all experienced that. It's kind of a wonderful experience when we happen to be able to say the right thing to somebody or uplift somebody or shed some light on a subject. And for that moment, we might be more enlightened than we are most of the time. So we've had probably experiences of what it means to have light come through us. But an enlightened being is someone whose light is coming through them all the time. They're uplifting everything around them. So I thought maybe a way to look at this idea of the sage or the enlightened being is to examine some of the quotes or the verses in the Tao Te Ching where Lao Tzu describes the sage. And Lao Tzu historically was a wise teacher back in the 6th century BC. And he was leaving China because it was becoming so materialistic. And as he came to a mountain pass, the guardian of the pass said, "Oh, great wise one, oh Lao Tzu, can you write down for me some of your teachings? Because of I was always being a guard up here, I was never able to come down to the valley and learn your teachings." So Lao Tzu took some time and he wrote down these famous verses, which have come to know as the Tao Te Ching. Tao literally means road. And the teachings of the Tao Te Ching are the teachings of Wu Wei, which is the idea of actionless action. That a sage is someone who is able to both blend action and inaction, which also Krishna speaks about in the Bhagavad Gita. But I asked Sarah if she could put together some of these verses from about the sage and the Tao Te Ching with some of her beautiful photography. So she's going to put that up on the screen, and I'm going to read the verses, and then we can talk about all this stuff.
I have some music I can hook up also, and I just need Renee or somebody to remind me the direct way to have computer music to the Zoom.
You go to your audio and you go in the lower left corner and you go down to audio settings. And then you want to have original sound for musicians marked. In mine, it's blue. And then when you go back to your screen after doing that, there will be a place up in the upper right where you can put original sound for musicians either off or on.
I'm in audio settings.
Mhm. So keep going down to original sound for musicians. That should be marked.
In advanced,
Mm.
no, I'm not seeing that. Personal, oh, original, yeah, it's clicked, original sounds for musicians.
Okay, and then look in your upper right corner and you want to click
Okay,
original
click on.
sound for musicians on.
Okay, there we are.
Mute our
Yeah.
mics.
How is that? Are we getting audio? Is it volume okay? Okay.
Galaxies of enlightened beings from the Taoist tradition. Sage acts without acting, teaches without words. Doing his work, he craves no reward. Completing his task, he calls for no commendation. His work is finished and forgotten. Its fruition is forever intact. Keep going. Yeah. The sage places himself last, and thereby is foremost. He forgets himself and abides with all. Is he not self-abandoned and thereby self-fulfilled? The ancient masters of the Tao were subtle and enigmatic, penetrating and profound. Because their wisdom is unfathomable, I can only suggest their appearance. Circumspect, like one crossing a stream in winter. Hesitant, like one sensing danger on every side. Formal like a guest, yielding like ice ready to melt, simple like an uncarved block of wood, open like a broad valley, opaque like muddy water. Who can make muddy water settle by being still? Who can remain at rest until the time to act? Those who hold to Tao do not try to overflow. Undepleted, they could tire and be self-renewed. The sage embraces the one and sets an example for the whole world. He does not display himself, and so he is distinguished. He does not swagger, and so he never stumbles. He does not exult, and so he excels. He does not contend, and so the world cannot contend with him. The ancient adage, yield and remain whole, is not an empty assertion. Be truly whole, and all things will come to you. The wise only do what needs to be done and never strive to subdue the world. Fulfill your purpose and never bluster. Fulfill your purpose and be not proud. Fulfill your purpose, but only as required. Fulfill your purpose without violence. Bravado when strong hastens decay. This is contrary to Tao. What is contrary to Tao comes to an early end. The sage teaches, I take no action and people transform themselves. I love tranquility and people correct themselves. I do not interfere and people prosper. I have no desires and people return to simplicity. The sage leads the people by serving with lowliness. To be ahead of others is to keep behind them. When the sage is ahead, no one feels his weight. When the sage is above, no one feels his burden. When the sage stands, no one is hindered. The world willingly supports him and none tires. He does not contend and none contends with him. To know you do not know is insight. To think you know when you do not is sickness. Only when we are sick of our sickness shall we cease to be sick. The sage is never sick, being sick of sickness. This is the secret of health. The sage fusses not and spoils nothing. He grasps not and never loses. The sage desires to be desireless, sets no value on rare goods, learns to unlearn his learning, draws others back to what they have lost. Thus he helps all to find themselves and does not lead any by the nose. The sage knows himself, but makes no display. He respects himself, but does not raise himself. He relies upon what is without, with what is within. He relinquishes what is without. And this is my favorite passage. The sage has no self of his own. He makes the self of others his own. He is gentle to the gentle. He is also gentle to the harsh, for virtue is gentle. He is faithful to the faithful. He is also faithful to the fickle, for virtue is faithful. The sage lives in the world in concord and rules with reticence. All the people strain their eyes and ears. The sage only smiles like a bemused infant. So those are some thoughts and some readings on this mysterious subject.
Thank you so much. And do you feel as if that description of the sage could apply to any amongst these galaxies of enlightened beings?
Well, that's the idea of it. I think these are the mysterious inner qualities of a sage or of an enlightened being. A sage, and I was equating a sage and an enlightened being to be the one, same thing.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, this is the time when we open it up for everybody, and this becomes a circular conversation. Cliff is not on the hot seat, although he's
goodness.
very welcome to add in. Thank you, Sarah, for putting together that that presentation with the wording that Cliff supplied from the Tao Te Ching. Vina, did you want to pose a question or make a comment?
I just loved it. Thank you. I was also looking at the Confucian gentleman and Taoist sage and the Sthita Pragya of the Bhagavad Gita. They all have similar qualities. It's so almost unintuitive for us, doing without doing, letting go, and all is sort of a negation in a way. But then when Renée said, do you think that does it apply to the divine beings or the enlightened beings? How do we understand that? I mean, why are we taking the beings here, like Cliff, sage, to Renée, sage, to the beings we can only speculate that they are there or mythologically read about them? So what is the connection between the sage here and the one enlightened being? So I'm a little confused, and you said it was enigmatic. So yes, it is. Thank you.
That's a great question.
I wonder if there's a need in our, or something built in this exploratory part of us that is the reason that we've gone to space, and it's a reason we keep going past what we actually can do at the time, the progress. And we operate this way also with enlightened beings, that they're to hold some conception that there's infinite levels above. There's the sage, the enlightened, and that just keeps going to infinity. That is a necessary nature in us to help us continue to progress, or to not even progress for doing of progress, but to see our true potential, to keep pushing that to thought.
But I want to say that true potential is the difficult work we are doing here. I mean, it's so hard to be what just Cliff read, passage after passage. It is, once we do that, it is a luminous state. It is, that's what they call enlightened, in light. So, you know, the Buddha or Tao, Taoist sages, especially Confucius, they talked about heaven for sure, and the mystery as a mystery. But when we talk about, of course, I mean, I'm being sort of devil. I love divine beings. I love enlightened beings out there. I love thinking about them. But the real work happens here in this world right now. And that's the luminosity that comes through in the beings who are doing that work. So I was, that's my question, was. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I saw Maurice put up his hand, and Bob. Maurice, is your hand still up, so to speak?
Well, I'll just maybe possibly add a little bit to what Vina and Cliff have said. I think that it really has to do with the nature of light. And so there are beings who are like our elder brothers or sisters who have come before and have purified themselves. And that's what Cliff referred to as this Guru Parampara chain of enlightened beings. And so when you have light, it dispels darkness and creates a field. And it's a field for everyone where there's no separateness. And I think we all get stuck with seeing ourselves as separate beings all the time, when in fact we're not so separate, because as you know, the light spreads from one person, from one thing to another, not giving anything up, but is much more universal. So this is a light of intelligence, of spirit, of consciousness. And so we're drawn to this kind of light. And then Bina does ask the tough question of how potentiality can become potency, so to speak. But certainly one of the requirements is to calm our mind, and with its porosity, let the light of intuition come through if we're calm enough. That's all I could say.
Thank you so much. Bob.
Well, that's saying quite a bit. What's interesting, I think, about what was said about light is that in terms of Taoism, yes, the work is all here, but the work is the Tao. The Tao is not necessarily just the path, it's the walking of the path. It's the moving. And in a similar way, we are already light. So light returning to the source of light is part of what's going on. And it's not getting somewhere, it's a returning, a letting be. And so that's where the Wu Wei has also been translated as saying, doing nothing, nothing is left undone. Getting nowhere means that you are very close to the ultimate light. And I would argue that, and as Cliff said, maybe that's true also for consciousness. There is a pure consciousness and there is our consciousness, and they're not necessarily two different things, but it's a returning by not holding on to the things that keep us away from it. It's interesting that light, it doesn't necessarily dispel the darkness. Darkness is the absence of light. And so, as long as you have light, darkness is irrelevant. And I would argue that that is true also for sound. And when we talk about sound and the sound current and the harmony of the spheres, we're looking at something very similar to light. And I think it's also true for life, the source of life. And these are all mysteries, but they're also something that relates to this commonality. In Taoism, it says, from the one comes the two, from the two comes the three, from the three come to 10,000 things. The one is the Tao. And as it manifests, yin and yang begin to happen. And as yin and yang begin to happen, you have heaven, earth, and man. And heaven, earth, and man are one. So there's a certain kind of energy there that's saying it's all there for you, and the movement is part of the process. I find it interesting when talking about Taoism. I thought that this was what Cliff was going to do today. There is philosophical Taoism, which is Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu, and beautifully described by Cliff. There's also religious Taoism. And in religious Taoism, you have what Renée was actually talking about, galaxy of enlightened beings. You have, as a first step, the 8 immortals. And these are beings that have taken on enough life and consciousness and light to be immortal. And that's part of the elixir of life that the Taoists talk about. And it's tied to meditation. In The Secret of the Golden Flower, they talk about the circulation of meditation, a small circle, which is basically your internal energy, and then the greater circle, which is from your toes to the top of your head. And those happen to the process of opening you to this light and this pure consciousness and this. And all of the Taoist immortals began as human beings. So it's an interesting concept. And so there could truly be a galaxy of Taoist immortals who have realized this return to the Tao or to the light. Anyway, I found all of that interesting, and I'm actually just expanding a little on what Cliff and what Marisa said.
Thank you so much. Not to put you on the spot, Shul, but I'm wondering if you have any thought along these lines.
I'm sorry, I have been just like embracing everyone's, I guess, spirits and ideas, and I have a little language barrier because I speak Mandarin, and then initially I read these in Chinese, and then trying to align the words with the concept like in English, and then so it's almost like it's almost like the same path but different path in a way for me. So I kind of just absorbing mostly for now. Yeah.
The languages are from such different systems that I can
Yes.
imagine it's difficult to
Yeah,
kind
it's like the same. We're all talking about the road, right? The doll, but it's like it's almost like through different language, it's almost like a different doll, but like we're all trying to find the one, but the one cannot really be described by language. So it's fascinating. Like we're kind of on, yeah, because even like in Mandarin, like what we're talking, like the daily language every day, it's like a different language than the book was written initially in the past. So the interpretations of the yeah. Anyhow.
Well, as we go along, if anything comes up for you, will you make sure to speak up?
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, because you're the only one who's come close to, I suspect, of the people here, having read this and understood it in something like its original language in this particular group. So you're a valuable resource. If something comes up, let us know.
Oh, yeah, will do. And I will need to read more too.
Oh, no doubt we all do.
Yeah.
And of course, we're all welcome to speak up from any perspective. If somebody has a point on this idea of enlightened beings from the Christian or Buddhist or Jewish or Islamic perspective, none of these traditions are separate from all the rest. They all touch. So if you have ever had an experience of a being of light within the course of your studies or your experience, that would be really relevant to share with us. Cliff?
I guess from what I'm hearing from Vina and Bob, I could have taken my little presentation in a completely different way, because all the traditions, ancient religious traditions that we have these ideas of hosts of enlightened beings. In the Christian tradition, angels, and the Buddhist tradition, you see these tankas with all these Buddhas and bodhisattvas drawn out. And now Bob's talking about, in the Taoist religious tradition, all these enlightened beings as well. So, but to me, I was kind of getting away from that because it requires a little bit of a belief structure. And one of my experiences in life has been studying the life of Ramana Maharshi, and everything that all these disciples of him would say about him and what he did in certain contexts. And he's a very simple man that lived in India. But the more I studied him, the more it seemed like every time he acted or said something, it was just, he hit the nail on the head. He was just always just, the thing I asked myself was, if someone had no personal ego, how would they answer this question, or what would they do in this particular context? And Ramana got it right every time. So I'm going, this is probably most likely, by all the evidence I'm looking at, a being with no ego, who therefore, one way of saying it, is enlightened. So I guess what I was trying to say in my presentation is we should just keep our intuitive eyes open, because we may rub shoulders someday with someone who is a sage or an enlightened being. And if we're not intuitive enough, they'll go right by us. But if we're looking for those inner qualities that are described by Lao Tzu in those passages, we may actually encounter an enlightened being who is completely in disguise.
Great point. Diana, was your hand up? And I do see Carolyn's.
Yeah, for me and my belief system, we are all one. We are already light and love. That's who we are. And I think that everyone here, I think, is practicing enlightenment. You know, we want to live a life connected to spirit. We want to live light and live that in our daily life. And I think that being aware of our connection with spirit, and even with the ego, you know, I hear get rid of the ego. I don't come with that. I believe that we need our ego to survive in the world. But where does the ego come from? Is it coming from a place of light and love, or is it coming from a place of self-fulfillment and ego aggrandizement, whatever that word is? And so for me, I see we're all journeying on this journey to find connection to spirit and love. We wouldn't be talking about this together if we weren't. And that each one of us, because we are all one, when we do an act of kindness, it does ripple out, and it does make differences in the world. And to feel that God is living through us, or Christ, or that we are enlightened beings, that is the prayer. So I talk about living enlightenment. You know, it's like it doesn't, and maybe it is for some people, it's not for me, that you have an experience, which I've had enlightenment experiences, but it's not like that. All of a sudden, my whole life was easy without any problems, and I never did anything. But I practice meditation, I practice prayer, I practice having the love and light, and live that as my daily practice. And I think that's true for everyone on this call, because you wouldn't be on this call if you weren't searching, or if there wasn't some feeling of connection. So that was what I was thinking. So thank you.
Thank you. Carolyn.
One of the attractive things we found in Taoism and reading the verses in the Tao Te Ching is the use of references to nature. It takes your mind and your attention out of a church, in particular rituals or a temple or whatever. And so that's really, right away, it's inviting to become kind of more immersed in nature, which is all encompassing in the reality we live in. And then, though, its references are kind of contrary, and we know that there's this whole idea of the Tao and the duality that's there, but a river is flowing, and yet there are bodies of water that are very still and peaceful. And so as you read, you're not going to be stuck on any particular fact or reality about nature, because nature is includes so many aspects of itself, and therefore so many aspects of what we experience. And so that, to me, I always think of Taoism as, you might say, plentiful with its reference of what the Tao is like, or if you will, does, but it's never stuck on any one point of view, one aspect, one characteristic. You need to have an open mind that's ready to receive a variety, and in some cases a contrary expression of what constitutes nature, and therefore what constitutes the world, you might say, we live in, and what constitutes the different capacities we have to both experience and understand nature. So we always liked, the references about, don't rush into war, but then you may have to rush into war, but it's not, it's just, there's a kind of a time and place, and ultimately a balance in what you'll experience in this vast panorama, and this vast, you might say, reflection of nature. So we just wanted to say that.
Yes, thank you so much. Sometimes when we are in the world of human beings, and sometimes when we are living within ourselves as a human being, and we can see all the shortfalls, all of the blockages of the pure light and love that we would love to have flowing through us, stuck. When we see, what goes on in the news and movies and all kinds of things in the human world, it can be rather distressing, and like make it as if this idea of galaxies of enlightened human or enlightened beings, how could that possibly be true? And there's something, it feels very cleansing to look at nature, just one flower and its perfection, like just the perfect symmetry maybe of the petals of that flower, and just being able to gaze upon that, it kind of can settle and calm oneself. Or a beautiful sunrise or sunset, maybe it's the patterns of the leaves falling or of the snowflakes, and something points to something much vaster and grander about the universe than our own petty worlds of personal selves. And so I appreciate that reference that you make, Carolyn, to nature and how it's utilized in the Taoist tradition, and many others as well, but certainly in that one. Elizabeth?
Aloha.
Aloha.
Oh, so many things going through my mind. Cliff, I share your love of the Gayatri mantra. And I live on an 18th floor, and every time I go up and down the elevator, I chant the Gayatri mantra and the Om Triambakam, because together they go 18 floors. One of the lines I was drawn to was, "The secret of health is to be sick of sickness." It made me giggle, and and I think I understand. I won't go into that one, but I did appreciate it. Bob talked about one way to look at Taoism is as a religion. I was more interested in looking at Taoism as a science, because I was trying to get at what the different sciences of the world had as their fundamental axioms or their worldview stories. And so I co-convened some seminars on understanding the different sciences in the world. And the three I got to in international symposia were Western science standard model, and then Vedic science, which the quantum scientists had turned to, and then Islamic science was the third one. That one was held in Kuala Lumpur. And what I got was that we had the Western science was a materialist science, and the Vedic science was a consciousness-based science. And the Islamic science, to my surprise, was a living universe model. And I wanted to do the fourth one on Taoism, as I understood it, was about the human within nature. And so I looked at that Taoist model, and I noted that they had matter, energy, and spirit on a continuum. And that's why I devised my keyboard model. It was based on that Taoist idea of matter, energy, spirit that each of us is matter, energy, spirit, and the whole universe is matter, energy, spirit. And so to me, the point of being human was to play the whole keyboard because we had the physical world as part of our continuum. And those enlightened beings you were talking about can only play in the higher registers, in the non-physical part. And Western science has no access to that non-physical part because they declare that to be real, something has to be measurable. And now we're getting all this AI and digital universes, and all of which I see as projections of humans. But the first person who spoke after you, Cliff, was talking about what is this relationship between the enlightened beings in the non-physical world and the enlightened beings on Earth. And I too am puzzled because some of those enlightened beings clearly had a presence as humans somewhere in our history. Take Jesus Christ, right? And there were a few others that I think had been incarnate. I don't think Taoism believes in reincarnation per se, the way Vedic science does, but there has to be this relationship between the human and those non-human enlightened beings. And I'd like to hear a little bit more from you, Cliff, on that.
Well, I from the theosophical tradition, there's the teaching of spiritual evolution, and that these beings that say no longer are operating on our planes at one time were, but they evolved to a point where they still not just have a presence, but are able to assist and protect other beings as they evolve themselves. But they at one time were also human beings. I mean, one example, I mean, a silly, not really a silly one, but an interesting one is the chain of Hawaiian Islands that a lot of us are on right now there's been island after island has come and gone off of this hotspot in the Pacific Ocean, but you don't see any of them anymore because they've all been subducted back under the Arctic plate. But likewise, there have been beings that have come into the world and evolved in consciousness, and to the point where no longer are they seen, but their presence is still there, as you were saying, Elizabeth, but on higher planes.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense to me, that there is that relationship. And I'm at the end of my life, and I'm looking forward to getting my wings, looking forward to knowing that I completed the mission of this life. I'm 88, so, this is end times. So I'm looking forward to this graduation and seeing, who all will be there and what's up next, and can we help from the other side? And all of those questions are much on my mind these days. And what was it? Oh, I was also curious, in people who do believe in reincarnation, as in the Vedic science, often will talk about animal incarnations, that people can alternate with other beings in our wonderful assembly of beings on this earth. And so I wondered about trees. I'm in love with trees, as are you, I know, Cliff. and trees, I think I may have talked about this before, have our 5 senses: hearing, touch, taste, smell, seeing, although they don't have eyeballs and ears because their sensory equipment is distributed all over invisible to us, sizes in the roots and the leaves and the trunks and all over the tree. And we, with physical instruments, have actually measured 12 senses beyond ours that they have. So I'm very much in awe of trees, and I've discovered along the way that in communion with trees, they'll do you favors. They'll protect people who need protection or whatever. As I say, that's very awesome to me. So there are a lot of famous spiritual tree images, the tree of life, the the roots and the crown, and Yggdrasil was one of the names for that tree. I wonder if they can be enlightened beings too. So my mind goes all over the place.
And maybe that particular line of thought we can take up next week, because we're actually going to be taking up the logic of reincarnation.
Oh, okay.
Let's do that. Unless Jonathan's going to bring up the fact that Krishna Janmashtami is on Monday, I will mention it in regard to the question that you raised. Jonathan, were you going to mention?
I mean, no, I wasn't. So go ahead. So, but
Just-
I had a different question. So,
Oh, okay. Just the idea that there seem to be these times when the situation is on Earth such that we need the deliberate and specific incarnation of one of these more evolved and enlightened beings to come into this world that they don't have to be a part of anymore, but for the sake of raising up the rest of us, they make that sacrifice of coming into all the limitations of being in a body and a personality and all the suffering on many, many levels, not just physical, but all kinds of levels, as they have to experience some of the great misery and suffering of the world, and they still come, and we hear about them in every single religion, and so there's always, I think, that connection. Those very, very, very enlightened beings that are way up on the keyboard that you talked about, there are some of them who still come back down and land on this earth again for our sake. And that's really inspiring to a lot of us. Jonathan?
oh, well, wow, what a conversation. So I was thinking, part of this, early on, there's a conversation about the sage and the enlightened being and so forth. And there's something I think that Sarah had said, and I can't repeat it, but it's something like the idea that if there are these beings so far along, even if we can't understand them, somehow that kind of opens up possibilities, even for us, it seems like. And I was thinking, there's a story about Confucius having met Lao Tzu, because they were contemporaries. And there's all kinds of different stories, but the one that I recall is he did meet Lao Tzu, and Lao Tzu just blew his mind, and that it's not that Confucius had expectations, it's just that he was just so far beyond, he was just incomprehensible of a human being. And so somebody asked him, well, what was it like meeting him? And Lao Tzu tried to explain it in terms of different creatures that he understood in nature, different facets of nature. And he says, you know, I've seen birds, I've seen animals that can run really fast, or birds that can fly, you know, but I've met a dragon. How do I describe meeting a dragon? You know, so some people would say, well, that's Lao Tzu, excuse me, that's Confucius, and he was into rules. And so, of course, he wouldn't understand somebody as enigmatic as somebody who's not into rules. But to me, just thinking about that, to me, it's a tribute to Confucius, that he was so humble and so humbleable by meeting somebody so much greater, at least in his estimation. And he was able to think of, the only image he could think of is something that was almost mythical, you know, like a dragon, right? But to me, that circles back around a little bit to this idea that just thinking about these kinds of beings must somehow open doors.
Yeah, I think of it as like if we're in 12th grade or 11th grade, we don't want to just consider 12th and 11th graders and those below. And I think it's similar in a way that, and with the potential that it's endless, that there's infinity of what's above. And I think, yeah, that's really inspiring. Just like if you're in 12th grade and you look at the people in their PhD program, and you're like, wow, there's so much more about this. You don't have a concept maybe what it's like, but just that little inspiration opens something.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you don't have the potential. All that same potential is very well within you. It's just you're still in 11th or 12th. And that's still to come for you. Yeah. Kirk?
Thanks, Renee. It was really a remarkable meeting today. So many great contributions. And, starting off with that really wonderful question from Vina, and then so many different perspectives and responses. I feel like I've sort of been visiting the whole galaxy of enlightened beings. But, one of the things I love about that image of galaxies of enlightened beings is that the idea that
Did we?
You went in the galaxy.
We're having some technical problems.
Went into the galaxies.
It was a black hole.
Yeah, no. He's out there in a galaxy somewhere.
Sho, can I ask you if you do want to add one more thing since we're right at the end? You're an honored guest of ours today.
Oh, me?
Yes.
I feel, I guess if I want to add one thing, I want to say how broad and magical, like if that's the word, of, because we were asked to recite these things as a kindergarten, well, not kindergarten, like as the 5-6-year-olds, and then the like primary school students. So like we got taught these things, we just recite and throw and don't think much about it. But like far, I spent my first, I guess, 15 years in China, and 18 years. And then I got here, and then now I meet you guys, and we're at different age. It's almost like we're at a different, for me, it's a different part of the galaxy, almost in a way that not just through the history of the time, but the world of span that, we're all being shadowed under the same enlightened like wisdom, in a way that I think you guys are the sparkles of the galaxy, or if it's not closest to be the enlightened beings. To me, I feel very inspired to be part of this. I feel like it's wonderful I get to join this. I know this is my first time joining this conversation too, and then I feel like it brought me back to 20 years, 30 years ago of my life, and something I feel like it was somehow lost and forgotten for a long time now, and through different phases, and it's reliving it through your words. So I think, yeah, so I think the road is, it's unfinished in that way, that it's still there in a way, it's like water that's streaming. It's beautiful. I appreciate being part of this group today. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It's really, I think when we have a chance to share with one another like this, and we share from our life experience, and we share from our life wisdom, it's almost as if we get the opportunity to live in each other's lives a bit, as if we had now had that experience that you had as a little child, reciting the Tao Te Ching's verses. I mean, now I have that mini experience of, I can imagine having done that myself, and then wondering, well, how would my life be different now, like for you? So I think that is something that we make possible for each other by sharing our wisdom and experience. I'm going to ask for a vote of thanks for Cliff in just a moment. I want to say that next week's meeting will be on the logic of reincarnation, and Lisette, who has been with us for the whole meeting, tuning in from North Carolina, which is quite a bit later than we are here in Hawaii, will be sharing, and she's going to do that. She's originally from South America, and she's going to, fortunately for us, share in English, and that will be from the on the Theosophical traditions outlook on this concept of logic of reincarnation. So is there someone who would like to give Cliff a thank you? Renée.
Yes, I just want to say thank you, because I think it's clear that the universe is far more than just this physical world that we have, and the stars and the planets and the galaxy, right? There's a deeper and more profound aspect of the cosmos, or in consciousness and spirituality. And thank you for talking on these enlightened beings and the possibility that the universe is designed for more than just physical exploration, but spiritual evolution and growth. So thank you for the ideas, for all of you. I always feel I live these conversations like I learn so much, and then I'm the next 30 minutes just processing. But thank you so much for such a stimulating conversation and beautiful presentation, Cliff.
Yes, thank you so much, Cliff, and every single one of you. Your contributions were invaluable, even when silent. You were with us. Thank you so much. Beautifully done.
Oh, by the way, Monica was here, so.
Oh, aloha, Monica.
Hi there. Oh my God, just taking it all in. Thank you so very much. This was magnificent. I'm grateful.
Yes, it was. And thank you again for last week.
Aloha. Thank you.
Aloha.
Thanks, Cliff.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Aloha. Great to have you, Elizabeth and Truth.